Thanks, Catherine. I'm delighted to have the opportunity briefly to speak on the Road Traffic Amendment Bill 2017 and of course to support it strongly. But on reading this traffic bill, it reminds us again it's a bit like a jigsaw of amending different sections and subsections of the many road traffic acts with deletions and substitutions provided for. So for me, first of all, this bill reinforces the urgent need for a consolidation project for all road traffic acts back to 1961. It's because of the number of acts and the complexity of legislation in this area that's led to so many loopholes and lacunae over the years, which weakens what in practice should be a very strong road safety legislation. It's typical, unfortunately, of this piecemeal government that where previous Minister Paschal Donoghue committed to consolidation of road traffic law over when he was Minister a few years ago, at the beginning of October, the current Minister told me that and I quote, "The consolidation of existing road traffic legislation is a significant project requiring the allocation of resources specifically to deal with such a project over an estimated 2 to 3 year period, and in light of the fact that my officials are currently working on a number of bills, most of which are primarily focused on road safety, it's not possible to commence such a consolidation project at this time." But just last week, Minister, I asked Taoiseach Varadkar about the same question, and of course he was Minister Donoghue's predecessor on the very same subject, and he said it's fair to say, and I quote the Taoiseach, "It's fair to say a long-standing project in the Department of Transport, Tourism and Sport, that's consolidation." He said, "I'm not sure how much progress has been made in legislation as yet. A consolidated bill would be a very good step forward," and he refers to the fact, of course, that we've consolidated company law and we've consolidated taxation law over the years, which to very good effect. So the question for this Minister, of course, is where exactly does he stand on consolidation? Is he committed to it, or is it something that's been put again on the long finger? On the debate last year, I think in last December, on the Road Traffic Bill 2016, Minister Ross told me, he said, and I quote, "My department is working on consolidation, as has always been the case," and I understand it's being worked on quite aggressively at the moment. So I'd like the Minister Ross, perhaps in his reply, to identify or to indicate, first of all, whether or not we do have a consolidation project. I mean, there's something like 16 or 18 road traffic bills alone since 1961, and a whole plethora of other bills which also affect the court system and also affect transport generally. But after that initial caveat, Catherine, I would like to commend Minister Shane Ross for bringing forward this important piece of legislation and for his determination in the past 18 months in different matters to improve road safety for road users. So I'm delighted to support the bill. The Minister has certainly faced much opposition for this bill from lobby groups such as the Vintners Federation, the Fianna Fáil Party and some other rural TDs. And I note what I would think are basically weasel words from Fianna Fáil here again tonight. But I believe rural TDs, they wrongly state that the bill is anti-rural. In fact, of course, as the Minister already referred to, 81% of the alcohol-related road deaths occur in rural Ireland, and therefore the bill will undoubtedly save rural lives as well. The legal limit, of course, for blood alcohol content is 50 milligrams for most drivers and 20 for certain drivers, learners, novices and professional drivers. But due to an anomaly, I believe, inserted into legislation by Fianna Fáil, drivers over the 50 milligram limit, but up to 80, receive just 3 penalty points and a €200 fine, whereas, of course, drivers between 80 to 100 milligrams are disqualified from driving for 6 months and fined for €100. So the bill, I think, addresses this anomaly, and the disqualification penalty, of course, has been shown in the past to be a very powerful deterrent, and that's the reason why I think fundamentally why the bill is very worth supporting. The bill, of course, amends the relevant subsections of Section 29 of the Road Traffic Act 2010 and removing references to penalty points and substituting references to disqualifications instead. As I mentioned, the pre-legislative scrutiny of the bill in April and May showed the strength of the alcohol lobby, with many deputies, I believe, disregarding the huge numbers of lives lost and of the families tragically affected by drink driving. As the Minister knows, of course, I've worked very closely over the years with Ms Susan Gray and her colleagues in the excellent civil society group promoting awareness, responsibility and care on our roads, the Park organisation. So I'd like to warmly welcome some guests to the gallery here today, including Susan and some members of Park, the Clancy family and others whose lives have been tragically affected by loss of lives on our roads. And I'd also like to pay tribute to the heroic work of Susan Gray, Anne Fogarty, Noel Fiona and Declan Clancy, James Regan Senior, James Regan Junior, Louise Dáil, Mary McElhenney, Joe Petford and the many other campaigners for saving lives on Irish roads over the years. And of course, Susan herself is one of the people who lost her husband Stephen very tragically a number of years ago on St Stephen's Day, when the unaccompanied learner driver in that crash had also been drinking that evening. The RSA, of course, has compiled data on alcohol's involvement in fatal crashes, which shows that between 2008 and 2012, alcohol was a contributing factor, as the Minister said, in 38% of fatal crashes. In her appearances before the Joint Committee on Transport, Tourism and Sport on 17th of May this year, to refute disingenuous claims by the Vintners Federation of Ireland, RSA Chief Executive Ms Moya Murdoch stated that, and I quote, "A total of 25 drivers and motorcyclists with a confirmed BAC between 21 milligrams and 80 were responsible for killing themselves tragically and or others because they consumed alcohol." And based on statistics available from the RSA, the Minister has estimated that at least 35 people could possibly be saved on our roads over a period of 5 years, and those 35 precious lives, of course, are well worth saving, and it's the reason why I think we bring this legislation forward. But we know for a fact that the figure quoted by the Minister is an underrepresentation of the extent of the problem, because for 3.5 of these 5 years there was no compulsory testing of surviving drivers in fatal crashes. Of course, we also don't have the figures on those with serious injuries due to road traffic collisions, where alcohol is a factor because of the dearth of accurate information in this area. Since the Road Traffic Bill 2011, there is supposed to be mandatory alcohol testing at the scene of all road traffic collisions where someone has died or been injured. Early questioning from me in the matter in 2012 showed that more than half of the drivers involved in RTCs were not being tested, despite this legislation being passed. In January 2015, the Taoiseach replied to a follow-up question on this, where she said that on the 19th of November 2014, there had been 161 fatal RTCs and that just 97 drivers, or 60%, were tested at the scene, 6 of whom tested positive for above the legal limit. I then, of course, asked why the other 64 drivers were not tested, and at the end of May 2015, I received an answer. And at that point, the information available from Garda Síochána was that of the 181 fatal collisions in 2014, 82 drivers involved could not be tested due to fatal injury, and a table indicated reasons then for another 51 drivers. But of course, 51 plus 82 only equals 133, and there was never an explanation given regarding the remaining 48 drivers. Many other reasons, of course, are given for not testing drivers at the scene, but it does seem these figures, Minister, are not acceptable. I submitted a question again recently on this matter and again received holding replies. Section 3 of the bill before us relates to the transitional provision for the period prior to commencement of Section 1 of the bill, and disqualification from driving for the offence of driving with between 50 and 80 milligrams BAC will only apply after the commencement of Section 1. So I hope the Minister will now, this time, indicate that we'll have an early commencement of this section immediately, because we've had the experience, obviously, of the Road Traffic Bill 2016, where a number of sections were absolutely not commenced, despite the fact that this House took amendments from parties in opposition and independents in opposition, and the Minister has effectively ignored them and refused to commence them. The Minister, of course, did say that in a PQ reply earlier in October, he would add an amendment to address the need for Section 41 of the 1994 Act to give powers to Garda Síochána to seize the vehicles of unaccompanied learner drivers. Last week also saw much discussion in the media about vehicle owners being responsible for unaccompanied learner learner drivers. So could the Minister indicate today whether there are one or two government amendments being brought forward in relation to unaccompanied learner drivers in this, to this bill at committee stage, namely the power for the Gardaí to seize cars and the making of vehicle owners responsible. Both provisions, of course, are matters to improve road safety, which the Minister promised this time last year to Mr Noel Clancy and his family. And indeed, as I mentioned, the Dáil passed a section of the 2016 Road Traffic Act to this effect. Unfortunately, that action by the Minister then it turned out to be effectively an empty promise. So we want to know for definite this time, when the commencement orders will be signed for the various sections. I welcome provisions in the bill in Section 2 which amend the Road Traffic Act 2002 to provide for the pausing of penalty point timing during a period of disqualification. Penalty points and reaching the threshold for penalty points will run consecutively rather than concurrently with any period of disqualification, like many other jurisdictions. As always, Minister, the Library and Research Service produced a very useful and informative Bills Digest. As well as discussing the bill, it also includes an interesting section on what works to combat drink driving. We also know that greater enforcement, of course, and I note the RSA is always talking about the 3 E's: education, engineering and enforcement. But enforcement, of course, is the key of road safety legislation. More MITs and visibility of Gardaí on the roads, they are the most important aspects of increasing road safety and reducing deaths and serious injuries. But there are also, of course, some technical and practical things that the relevant industries, the motor insurance industry, for example, could be involved in championing. The ignition, for example, interlock is an area that's of interest. It's a device linked to the vehicle which would prevent the vehicle from starting if there was any alcohol detected in the driver's breath. And Queensland State, for example, in Australia, use these locks for drivers who have already been convicted of drink driving, and interlocks are also used in some European countries. And drink driving, of course, is an international issue, and organisations such as the World Health Organization have published reports and strategies on how to reduce drink driving. But disqualification for driving over the limit is one of the WHO's recommendations, as is lowering the BAC limits. So I think it's in line with the legislation before us today. The 2010 North Review in the UK also stated that the threat of a substantial period of mandatory disqualification has proved to be a potent weapon in combating drink driving. I've also, of course, believed that vehicle manufacturers and EU vehicle standards, known as the whole car industry, needs to focus on driver safety most of all. And for example, why haven't many saloons not got a rear window wiper? And why isn't there speed limit warning technology, which you find in many new vehicles, such as the Toyota Avensis? Why is it not mandatory, for example, in all vehicles? But Cathaoirleach, already in Ireland this year, 615 drivers were arrested in January for driving while intoxicated, 672 in February, 711 in March, 903 in April, 801 in May, 750 in June, 723 in July and 776 in August. And this represents an increase of 14% on the same period last year. It would be interesting to see, Minister, how many of these, depending on the BAC levels, have taken their penalty points and paid their fixed charge notices to avoid a court appearance, and how many have decided to challenge the matter in court. Of course, we know that because of a mistake by Taoiseach Varadkar when he was Minister for Transport, Tourism and Sport, that large numbers of drink driving cases have been thrown out of court due to the loophole around the breathalyser reports being printed in Irish and English. That was Statutory Instrument 541, where the Minister at the time and the Department seemed to misinterpret the two copies rule of being given after a breath test, one for the driver and one for the Gardaí Síochána. So we await the opinion, of course, of the Supreme Court in this, and the previous Minister Donoghue, of course, closed that loophole arising from Minister Varadkar's mistake in 2015. In January this year, the RSA also, of course, conducted a national survey on attitudes to drink driving, and as the Minister said, found that 91% of people surveyed supported automatic disqualification for those driving over the limit. And of course, again, as the Minister said, this equates to 93% in rural Ireland. and 89% from the urban. So I don't buy the argument the bill is anti-rural. I think the figures I've mentioned here show that statistically more rural lives will be saved, given that alcohol is a factor in such a high percentage of RTCs around the country. Saying that rural pubs will suffer also is unfortunately a totally unacceptable argument against this bill. Using social isolation as a reason for rejecting the bill is also, I think, disrespecting the thousands of friends and families who've lost loved ones or suffered serious injuries in road traffic crashes due to alcohol over the years on Irish roads. As a transport spokesperson in the past for the Labour Party, I was always a strong supporter of local and community public transport companies. I remember a very impressive local transport company, for example, OK Transport, which was a brilliant public service for Offaly, I think, in West Kildare. Other similar bodies from Kerry and Cork and various parts of Ireland presented to the Transport Committee. Obviously, supporting those and supporting local taxi and hacking services should also be encouraged and measures brought forward. I noted that Minister Ross responded sympathetically to Deputy Hayden's proposal that we should come forward and support local rural transport providers. Again, like my Sinn Féin colleague, I'd like to see evidence of that coming forward as soon as possible. Besides the number, of course, of tragic deaths and the horrendous suffering of families following the deaths of many family members, there is a very simple argument, I think, always, and powerful argument against drink driving. A motor vehicle is a complex machine where the driver's absolute and full attention is always necessary when the vehicle is in use, and no employer would permit an employee to operate machinery if they're under the influence of alcohol or drugs. So why should the operation of a vehicle be any different? Already this year, as of yesterday lunchtime, we've lost 133 people, I think, on our roads, and it's or 130 rather. And while this is 33 less than last year, it's still far too many. We're also not giving enough attention to serious injury caused on our roads. I was invited recently to a very informative briefing by Dr. Jack Short from Trinity College on a paper he published in October 2017 on traffic injuries in Ireland, a neglected problem for the Statistical and Social Inquiry Society. And he's found a very serious problem with the reporting and recording of serious injury caused by road traffic crashes. His initial conclusion seemed to be that serious crash injuries may be underestimated by a factor of 3. And he's given very interesting statistical evidence from what he's been able to gather from the health system and from the obviously from the justice system that this is indeed the case. So I believe the Department is currently examining Dr. Short's paper, and I'd certainly encourage them to do so. We also know the conviction rates for drink driving remain low, and even if the court figures are believed, the number of those who have lost their licence numbers recorded on conviction is shockingly low, and worse still are the recorded figures around those who have been disqualified from driving, returning their licences to the RSA PO Box address in Cork. On the 29th of May 2017, I visited the Medical Bureau of Road Safety, the MBRS, on the invitation of Professor Dennis Cusack, its director. It was a very informative and useful visit, and obviously it would be very useful for all deputies. And Professor Cusack and his colleagues and Chief Analysis showed us the breath testing devices and drug testing devices. We were informed, of course, that the tender for the new breath test Draeger devices had gone out 2 weeks previously and were due back before the end of June. And Professor Cusack said these would then be selected and tested for months before being sent out for use. And Professor Cusack also stated that he would expect the new devices to be available to Gardaí in early 2018, and those new breath test devices will have a chip to record location, time and number of each test. So that visit, I think, and the information we received, it is something that's very positive, and that hopefully will return, I suppose, the whole breath test mechanism and breath testing process and all the legal measures that flow from it into a process that will become accountable, given the revelations in the past, where now it appears that breath test figures may have been inflated by more than 2 million. The Park organisation has done extensive research and analysis of figures supplied by the Justice Minister following PQs I raised on drink driving, and As the Minister knows, of course, the Park organisation has attended court cases around the country to monitor the outcomes of road traffic offences, and in particular those relating to drink driving and disqualified drivers. The organisation regularly completes analysis of PQ data from the Department of Justice and Equality, and from their analysis on drink driving court cases during 2015-2016, an average of 20% of those convicted in court had their licence numbers recorded. That figure reduced to 7% in Kerry and 8% in Limerick. The RSA, of course, are in charge of driving licence 2013, yet on their own admission to RTE this year, 98% of those disqualified are not surrendering their licences to the RSA. And so it does appear that there are huge gaps in both the information and in the administration of road traffic law that we need to urgently address. But on the bill itself, in conclusion, I welcome it warmly. I urge all my colleagues to support it. Hopefully it will be a major step, Cathaoirleach, to end drink driving and to save many lives annually.